they were always having a good time, and it was a great working relationship with all those 6 guys, meaning Don, Ted, and the 4 Van Halen guys. And just for have it to become so difficult, I think that's what you're anyone who reads the book to understand too. It's just sort of like you like kind of look back and go, yeah, it was a big hit, but God, it was like it ended up wrecking this magic thing.
Right.
And again, not so much like Ted. It wasn't so much that like I can't produce those guys anymore. It's all wrecked now. It's more like those guys split. Like Ted said to me many times, like those guys want to go on and do their own shit. That's fine. I mean, Don and Ted has enormous respect for Don as a studio guy, and said Don could have done it. Let Don and Ed want to do it, great. But just for the fact that Dave and Ed and Al and Mike couldn't work together anymore, that's what killed Ted.
Right. What also is weird, though, his poppy criticisms of Jump were interesting because Pretty Woman and Dancing in the Street were both poppy singles.
Again, I think that's something that maybe Ted would have to sort of drill down and kind of maybe explain it in his own way. But I think he would just say that with Dancing in the Street, I mean, that was like like a second or third single on the record. This was going to be he knew this was going to be the defining track on the record.
Right.
And it was look, Jump, the keyboards are way more keyboardy, for like 80s keyboardy than anything Dancing in the Street was or anything. I mean, again, as a kid, I don't think I would have been like, oh, that's a keyboard at Dancing in the Street. I maybe would have known, but I never would have been like,
right.
Well, that's like Depeche Mode. I think that's what, I don't want to put words in Ted's mouth. I think that was the thing he was thinking. It was going to be so much away from what Van Halen, the Ain't Talking About Love, Unchained, Everybody Wants Some.
Right.
That type of stuff that really was what Van Halen was recognized for. I think he was worried that it wasn't going to be accepted. I mean, I think that's what he was worried about. And, Ed and those guys, and Ed particularly had the guts to say, I don't care. This is what I like to do, and this is what I want. All the credit to Ed, which Ted really tries to give in the book, to say Ed was the guy. He saw it. He knew it was something that was the right next step for Van Halen.
That's really interesting that Ted had that perspective, because Diver Down, I mean, it was certainly lighter than the album before it, Fair Warning. I mean, it was poppier in a lot of respects. I mean, this was the band that had done Big Bad Bill as Sweet William Now, and if that's not a left turn for any band, never mind Van Halen, I don't know what is. It wasn't the lead-off single of the album.
Right.
But I think Van Halen had started planting those seeds, so I was just kind of surprised that Ted was surprised.
I think, sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you. I think the thing that probably, too, is that the way Diver Down was done, it was done in such a compressed fashion. A lot of the stuff was, like Ted said, was kind of thrown together. It doesn't mean he doesn't like some of the stuff, but it was just like, it was like, holy shit, we got to, that's how Dancing in the Street came to pass anyway, was that they needed another song. Don Landy told me himself when I spoke to him, he said it was miserable to make, from my perspective, for his perspective, to make it, because everything was so rushed. It was like, okay, hurry up, we got to record. Then we got to mix in like just an insanely fast amount of time. And so Ted said we were out of time, and that's why the Dancing in the Street song idea, where Ted said, let's take this keyboard riff that Ed's written and we can meld it on top of Dancing in the Street. He said that was to finish it, because Dave couldn't, again, in this compressed time period, they were trying to finish this record. Dave couldn't come up with a melody or lyrics. He couldn't come up with his piece of the song in the amount of time they had. They kind of ran out of ideas. And, like anything else, you put it to the side, you come back to it 2 months later, and maybe you would have written a brilliant thing for it. He didn't, and they were out of time. And that's when, Dancing in the Street sort of became this thing. Oh, we can do this. And Ted actually really likes the song. Actually, he's like, he actually thinks it's cool. I mean, he kind of understands the, the sort of the 20,000 foot view of what Ed's upset about. He understands that, but he doesn't quite understand why, because he thinks that considering how stuck they were and how they were out of time and they needed something for it to work in Ted's perspective, to work that well and to come off, people don't like the song, whatever, but to kind of come together and be like something they could put on the record. I think he's like, yeah, actually, it was actually pretty damn good, considering we were like out of time and we were like trying to get something that would be a single. And again, understand that was going to be a single. They needed another single from that record. Pretty Woman had already hit the charts, and so they couldn't release that again. And what else were you going to put out? Secrets, but that was never going to be like sort of like an upbeat summer Van Halen song.
So now, I disagree, but I love that song.
He does.
Yeah, I love it too. Yeah. I love it too, but it wasn't going to be anyway.
Speaking of Don Landy, what was the deal with him holding the tapes hostage for the 1984 sessions? Because that really seemed to be the straw that broke the camel's back with Ted's relationship with him.
I mean, I think it's just one of these situations that Don and Ed became, sort of standoffish against Dave and Ted, and it became this situation where it was kind of a power struggle over the record. I think Don and Ted are friendly now, and they sort of water under the bridge. Those guys don't sit there and like talk about that stuff. It's sort of irrelevant. But the best in sort of working with Ted on the book and kind of thinking about it, I mean, I think those guys just kind of wanted to run out the clock, and they were on the record schedule because they didn't want Ted and Dave maybe to remix it. There was this period of time where the album was being finished, and Ted sort of thought, well, we're done. Like, come on, okay, you guys, whatever you do for the next few days, but turn the record in because we're done. We've mixed it. Well, Ted has never kind of gone back and like interrogated Ed and Don about this, but presumably, and I think that's pretty accurate, probably what happened is they just kept mixing. They just sort of said, well, we'll just, we'll make it sound more like we want to make it sound than maybe more than Ted and Dave want it to sound. Right. Instead of it being sort of a group, again, I don't know this for 100% certainty because Ted doesn't know this 100% certainty, but my supposition and based on talking to Ted about it, seems like those guys probably decided that we're going to make it more sound like we want to make it sound, make the drums sound the way we want it to sound, make the guitar, whatever they did. And they worked on it and they continued to tweak it. And that's where the problem came in, was that Ted was the executive and going, shit, this is late. We need this. We want this to come out before just January 1st. We want the album to come out before 1983 ends. And it was a big, from Ted's perspective, a big problem because there's a whole production process around making a record with an album cover, and you have to basically, you can't not turn in the master tapes and then expect everyone else is going to do their job. Then you show up at the last minute with the record and go, oh yeah, let's put it out tomorrow. You have to master it and then stuff. I think that just, Don himself would tell you he just hadn't slept and just kind of lost it. He just lost his, this basically the pressure of the whole year kind of came to that culmination in the moment. Ted, he was trying to basically sneak in to master the record, and Ted sort of confronted him and go, you're not mastering the record. Where you been? Like, I haven't seen you in 3 weeks and whatever. And I've been trying to reach you. And there was just sort of this moment where I, sort of just out of, just sort of a momentary moment of insanity. I'm going to throw them in the ocean or whatever he said. I mean, it wasn't like Don was going to actually go throw them in the ocean. I think he was just like, he just come to the end of his rope where he was just been, dealing with this. You can imagine the fun of dealing with Ted, Don, and Ed in that tiny little studio up there for, Ted, Ed, and Al, and, in that tiny little pressure cooker of a studio up there for months. I'm sure he was just exhausted and just sort of lost it. But, Ted gives, as in the book, as you guys know, gives enormous credit to Don Landy for the way the records sound, and says flat out, if it hadn't been for Don, the first record never would have been a smash. Never. He just, basically Don made that record sound like, something unearthly. And that was really Don's magic behind the console, and, gives him massive props throughout the book. Is just a genius. Compares him to Jeff Emmerich from the Beatles with George Martin. And that's what I mean about the whole album making situation. It just became so stressful. And I think, I don't want to use the word toxic maybe, but just so fraught with, emotion for all those guys, and just so stressful and just so unpleasant at the end. I think that's really what, and again, like you asked me about like why he doesn't like Jump. He doesn't like the songs, just like he's gonna be like, oh shit, remember that thing that happened and this happened and stuff. It just wasn't fun, right? It just wasn't a fun record to make.
Ted was so worried that, the album was late as it was, that he made his own mix from like a backup copy of the album because he thought he wasn't going to get anything from Don and Ed, right? The question I'm really getting at is, does he still have a copy of his own mix?
No, he does not. I think part of the reason why is, again, I don't know this for sure. I think part of it was just to sort of basically, if, God forbid those guys decided to move to go to Mexico with the tapes. I'm just making that up. Whatever. Like, you had to deliver a Van Halen record. He was supposed to, it's supposed to come out. Everything, the whole marketing plan was in place. The whole record company was, obviously, they're one of the biggest acts. So I think it was just a matter of, we should just need to have a fallback plan in case something completely unpredictable happens. But Ted would tell you, is like, they were just seat of the pants mixes. They were just like, we need to work to have a mix there. So if worst case scenario comes and it's like, oh shit, we don't have the Ed and Don mix. We got 72 hours. Let's finish this off. It wasn't, it was never as if like, as Ted would explain it, it was like never as if like, we have a perfect album here that, we don't need your mix anymore. It was more like, what if those guys just flake? But that kind of captures what was going on, where it's this sort of this lack of communication and this, what Ed has talked about in some interviews where Ted would drive up the driveway and, knock on the door and say, "I need the album." And they'd be like, "Oh, Don's not here." And then Don would be like down the hill and would then drive back up when Ted left. So it just had gotten a place that was probably not the healthiest for those guys.
It's also very shocking considering Don and Ted were like the dynamic duo of producing and engineering at that time.
Right.
I mean, those guys weren't just, two colleagues. They were like a team. I mean, they were so lock in step. And the way Ted describes it in the book is even the way we're situated, it's almost like they were moving as one person. Like they just sort of had such jive. Like, where was the breakdown? I didn't understand.
I mean, again, that would be stuff that, Ted and Don would have to speak for themselves. I mean, just from what I was able to gather from Ted, it's, there became a level of, I don't want to say necessarily distrust, but just sort of, maybe misunderstood motivations. Whether it be Ed thinking that Ted hates Jump, where, Ted's like, "I never hated Jump. I just didn't think it was right for Van Halen." That type of thing, where there just became, a negative vibe, and whether, Don was obviously up there all the time with Ed. I mean, he was there all night.
Right.
And the next day, and just kind of spending these long hours with Ed. And I think it just sort of became this sort of, they divided into two camps, but I don't think it was by any sort of design by anybody. I don't think anyone was like that. And in fact, as Ted indicates in the book, and Ted helped sequence 5150.
Yeah, that was also shocking. Why would they even ask him to sequence 5150? Like, anybody could have done that in their camp. Why would they go to Ted after he turned them down for producing and then, "Hey, can you please sequence the record?" That was kind of shocking.
Well, because he had sequenced all the other Van Halen records. And I think it was a matter of, Ted's an executive at the company, and, it makes sense for him since he'd worked with those guys before. And again, that's the thing. It's like things got quote unquote weird, obviously, with Ed and Ted, for example, but Ed calls Ted to work on the Private Life record, and they work on the Private Life record. And then Ed calls Ted and they work on the Fuck record with Landy John. So it's like, you just need time apart. I mean, Don would tell you, he actually was disappointed in the end of the day when Ted didn't do 5150. He wanted Ted to produce 5150 and it just didn't happen. And so it was never, I don't think it was ever as if they were like, we don't like each other. It was just more of like, we just need some time apart and whatever. I mean, Don told me himself, he's like, it was a tremendous disappointment to me that it just wasn't wasn't going to happen, that we'd always done the records together and we'd always made it work and it had always been something special. I think Don recognized that too, that the Ed, Ted, Dave, the whole, whatever, or at least definitely Ed, Ted Templeman, Don Landy together had always made great music together. And Ted was personally disappointed, but, he felt the loyalty to Ed, obviously, and Ed wanted to do the records with Don, and that they went about their business and Dave went and did theirs.
Does he have any relationship with Ed at all?
Who's that?
Ted.
I mean, they've exchanged greetings from now and then, like happy birthday greetings and stuff like that. I don't think they're like hanging out on weekends and stuff like that. But it's from what I understand, they're just occasionally will converse. Yeah, I mean that would be my understanding.
What about Dave? From talking to Dave and
with
Ted.
Dave
and Ted, or is that did it?
As far as I know, Dave and Ted haven't talked in a long time. I can't speak with 100% certainty with that. Ted has talked to Mike on occasion. Again, it's just sort of like like old friends, like, hey, I got an email from Mike, he'll tell me a year ago, and it's like I know they exchanged emails. Ted wrote to Mike when Mike lost his grandson, for example.
Right,
I know that was one of the times they talked. And on Ed's birthday, Ted sends Ed birthday emails and a text message or something like that saying happy birthday, and they talk for a minute or something like that. But I don't know for sure when the last time Ted Templeman and Dave talked.
There's also an interesting part of the book where Ed calls up Ted in the midst of making for unlawful carnal knowledge and says, "Ted, can you come down here and crack the whip?" Which is shocking to me, because he doesn't seem to like authority, Ed. He sort of likes to do his own thing in his own little cave, which is 5150. Why would he go to Ted after all that time and all that, goings on, and out of the blue call him to come and, of all things, crack the whip?
Well, because he knew Ted could get the record finished. I mean, that's the problem, is that Ed, who was never super focused on deadlines, let's say, for lack of a better term,
he's
like
an
a lot of
artist.
musicians.
He's an artist. He's not a producer.
Right.
He's an artist.
Right. Like a lot of musicians, they're not going to be focused on,
of course,
on deadlines. Andy Johns God rest his soul, wasn't particularly able to do that either, from what I've been able to put together. That's why they called and said, can you come in? We've got too much material and we're not going to finish. And that album took a long time to make. I don't remember the exact timeline,